Hey guys, it's the Melblade 5, and I haven't really covered anything solely anime related in some time. Partly because I am still very self-conscious about not wanting to make too much anime stuff close together, since this is still primarily about games and I don't want to alienate people. But I've kind of had this one series I've considered giving my thoughts and gradual experience with for a long time, but I've gone back and forth on whether to go through with it, and even developments of the series itself make me put that off. That series, whose title poses the ever so important question, is called, Is it wrong to try to pick up girls in a dungeon? Or DanMachi for short. This show is, a bit of an interesting case for me. Not just because of the way I discovered the series, but I also have somewhat of a curious story around how I ended up getting into it, which differs from the usual, I like this, I say in many of these videos, as well as my general impressions of the arcs and seasons after that point that are also more unique compared to most of the crap I've said before. Initially, I was unsure of how to exactly articulate my thoughts on some points of the show I deemed important to cover outside of my anecdote, which played a factor in my internal debate on whether to make this, but upon finishing the fairly recent Season 3, where I also reflected on those thoughts across the whole show so far, I was finally able to find the words I meant, which made me fully set on actually doing this. I first heard of the show all the way back in the summer of 2017 through a bunch of those Guess This Anime videos, which I only watched to see how bad my knowledge was, with it being at the time when I'd only just started seeing some proper anime that wasn't a game adaptation or Yu-Gi-Oh! All I had to go off of was the long title and promo poster, but the title containing the word dungeon made me interested because I thought it might work like a video game. And I would be okay with picking up a few girls on the way too. At a later date, I did look up several screenshots from the show where I did like the look of the visuals and overall world design, but I could never find a clear view on if it was considered good or not, so I always ended up pushing it to one side in mind and forgetting about it. That was until November 2018, when it suddenly came back to me, and at that point, I just decided to bite the bullet and watch it anyway. I've seen tons of quote-unquote isekai trash, why should I let what others think affect me now? And thus my initially unusual, then later invested journey with DanMachi began. In a world where the gods live among mortals for fun, lies the city of Orario, where a giant dungeon is situated in the city, which is represented by a tower despite it traveling downwards. Many adventurers of different races, ranging from the likes of humans, furries, and pillar men, explore this dungeon whilst belonging to god-aligned guilds called familias. And one sole member of a familia is the inexperienced adventurer, Velve Crotzo. Putting aside the fact that someone named their kid after an instrument, at first glance, Belle appears to be your typical protagonist character. Honestly, when I watched the first few episodes, I did find him to be cliché and generic by having the same kind of young, mostly positive, naive, and innocent personality that many bog-standard main characters have. This initially made me think he was boring, and it took a bit of time for me to really warm up to him as a character. But once I did, my impressions of him greatly improved. Bella's the kind of character who grows throughout the story. Not in massive chunks, but ever so slightly as time goes on, creating a sort of juxtaposition between how he is at the beginning of the series to what he becomes later as he keeps maturing. Plus, when I started to get more into the show, I noticed they used Belle's personality traits that I previously wrote off as being generic to give him some legitimate flaws, whereas I feel other characters with those traits would normally use them to make them perfect. There are plenty of times where Belle's naivety can make him too optimistic for his own good, and his innocence especially when it comes to the ladies flirting and trying to get intimate with him as he's immediately shot out of his comfort zone. The same holds true for Belle's own feelings when it comes to the sword princess Ise Wallenstein, which sounds a little too close to Ainz, who he immediately falls in love with and dedicates himself to becoming as strong as possible so he can match her strength and feel worthy enough of confessing his feelings to her and being together. Belle's maturity also wraps round back to his other main goal of wanting to be a true hero and adventurer by following the code of his late grandfather who sounded like a massive player. Belle's view of what makes a hero gets continually challenged throughout the series as he's thrown into all of these serious predicaments, which further shows the flaws in his innocence too, as he has to either rethink his views or put them to the test. Like I said, it took a while for me to realize this, but once I did, I think it really pays off. But I think what also makes Belle's overall character work so well is how he plays off of the other characters in the series. And the one who probably does that the best is the one who took him in when no other familia would accept him. Hestia. The goddess of... Wait, what's Hestia the goddess of again? The virgin goddess of the hearth. Huh? Virgin? With knockers like that? I follow the same common view as other fans when I think the words Hestia is bestia, and that goes beyond the two big reasons already given. For a goddess who isn't useless, she is absolutely ridiculous, goofy, and funny in the way she acts from her lines and mannerisms, especially when Belle is concerned. She's madly in love with him and hatches all these little ways for them to be affectionate towards each other and get him to like her back, much to Belle's embarrassment. And when she sees Belle in the presence of any other woman, she goes nuts! But despite how clingy she can get, Hestia isn't one of those creepy stalker-like characters, which is what allows her to be funny with these jokes. She does legitimately care about Belle in ways that go beyond just her feelings, as she's there to provide emotional support and other sorts of help when he needs it. The two play off each other very well in the more serious, melodramatic moments of the show, but mostly background to when she's being goofy and love-struck. Hestia essentially acted as the introduction for how ridiculous many of the gods are here, where some are also oddly gender-bent. Hephaestus is a woman, Loki is a woman, which they also did in Fire Emblem, but with that one, I'm not complaining. And Ganesha is just a weirdo.
I am the god Ganesh! This wedding angers me! All will die unless it is stopped!
However, there's also Freya, the Norse goddess of beauty and love, who pretty much acts as the main villain of the series, as she is, to use weeaboo terminology here, the yandere archetype. She too is in love with Belle, for some reason, and enacts all these evil plans for the purpose of unlocking his potential to make him strong enough to then make him hers, like releasing a giant killer ape in the city! All while acting from the shadows, where at the point the anime is currently at, nobody is even close to figuring out her true colors, despite her obviously evil-looking outfit being her casual clothes. Now that I've given the general overview and my thoughts on what's introduced in the very early episodes, it's time I went over my anecdote. So after watching the first 3 episodes, I honestly wasn't left feeling that interested or invested in watching further, as I hadn't super enjoyed what I'd seen so far. I didn't dislike it, but I did feel very indifferent towards almost everything. This was still at the point when I found Belle to be generic, and while I did already like Hestia, I thought she alone wasn't going to carry everything else for me. I even felt the fight scene with the killer ape wasn't the most exciting thing in the world, so I did consider dropping the show. But as this was back when there was only 1 season, I thought, well, there are only 13 episodes, and I haven't hated what I've seen so far, so I can keep watching for a bit, and if I still don't like it, I wouldn't have wasted much time. And thank God I did that, as episode 4 introduced the one who would lead me to really liking this show. Lily Ruka Arde. At first, she seemed like your standard, everyday character, but once I actually got to know her, she fixed the one thing that was holding back my enjoyment before. Coming from a poor family, her parents were adventurers who died in the dungeon. In order to survive on her own, she had to join the Soma familia, but as a supporter due to her short and frail stature. Then all the other adventurers, especially Soma followers, treat her like shit because she's a supporter and see her as disposable. From making her life hell, Lily grew to hate all adventurers and only works to deceive, swindle, and backstab those who employ her so she can make enough money to escape from her situation, whenever those adventurers don't try to do the same to her. She persuades Belle to hire her so she can do the exact same thing to him, but gets surprised when he actually treats her kindly. However, her years of abuse clouds her judgment and causes her to assume that he'll be like all the other adventurers she's met when push comes to shove. Lily's gradually developing companionship with Belle, whilst also having to watch this particular group of Soma adventurers abuse her, is what made me want to keep watching across the next 3 episodes, as I knew she was going to properly party up with Belle from the opening, but wanted to get to that moment because I felt so bad for her. She doesn't deserve to be treated like this or practically forced to think and act the way she does, and seeing her backstory made me think this even stronger. All my anticipation majorly paid off when I finished watching episode 6, where Lily attempts to leave Belle for dead while stealing his knife. Then those jackasses show up, steal everything she's managed to save up, and leave her for dead so they can escape. But then Belle comes to the rescue. And the ending scenes made it all, as Lily finally realizes that Belle is the first person who was genuinely nice to her through and through, without any ulterior motive, making her feel terrible about the way she treated him before and believe she didn't deserve to be saved. But other than her being a girl, Belle wanted to save her because she's her. And it just warmed my heart so much to see Lily have someone she can trust, be safe, and happy around. I got really emotional at this part. Like, Shield Hero levels of emotional. Likewise for myself, this was when I realized I now care about the characters and the story and so on because of how invested I got in Lily's arc. And it didn't stop there, as this was when I started to like Belle more too. Not just because of how nice he was to Lily, but it also gave me more insight into his character to see there's more to him, which then paved the way for me to notice the other things I like about him later. From there, everything kept going up for this season. So for me, Lily is second bestie or something like that. I owe much of my enjoyment of this series to her. Oh, and Lily's now in love with Belle too, which made me realize that this is my first, again to use weeb terminology, harem show. I do want to touch on that for a bit, as something else I like about DanMachi is how I think it does this aspect well compared to other shows. I've watched a few clips of shows with similar premises for reasons, and it always annoyed me why all these hot chicks love the main dude for no reason when he doesn't have any good qualities. Meanwhile here, I think most of the girls do have real reasons for why they like Belle, or are things you can easily guess, and Belle himself does have positive qualities to also justify it, which is why that doesn't bother me here. After Lily's arc was when the other, smaller gripes I had started to be rectified too, namely the action. Cause we get this cool Minotaur fight in episode 8, which I found way more exciting because there's more of a struggle here with a lot more fast-paced and acrobatic fight choreography throughout the whole thing. Plus the character-driven side of it as Belle gets stronger and closer to Eyes by defeating his previous fear, even though this was another scheme concocted by Freya. And almost every other proper fight scene after this reaches a similar level of enjoyment from my monkey brain side. I even got more characters later on, as in the next episode, we get another new party member. Velve Crotzo, a blacksmith from Hephaestus' familia. Velve's introduction was a bit of an awkward situation for myself. I did like him pretty quickly for his chill attitude and role in the group, both for how his personality plays off the others and his practical use for his forging. He just suffered from a bit of bad timing, as he first appears nearer to the end of the first season, with the following episodes being based around the final arc of the season. So we had somewhat of a clash for screen time, which resulted in me taking longer to like him on the same level as Belle and Lily compared to what it took for them. Especially when that was all I had to go off of for about half a year until season 2 came out. But he did get there. He even got his own character arc around his family's fall from grace and not wanting to make magic weapons due to the stigma he gets around it, until deciding to change his stubborn ways in order to help fight for his friends. It obviously wasn't as impactful on me as Lily's arc was, but it still works given the screen time issue. In the later seasons, when he does have more time to be shown with the rest of the group, which took the things I already liked about him and simply made them more pronounced. He even starts to take up a big brother sort of role towards Belle at that point, so he does manage to find his own place in the cast eventually. Now with this cute, tight-knit trio comes that final arc, when the this guy, Familia, drops a ton of monsters on them so they can save themselves, while they're now stuck heavily weakened, injured, and forced to delve even deeper into the dungeon to get around. Whilst Hestia forms a rescue group consisting of herself, the Take Me On Familia, Ryu, and Hermes, who, personality-wise, you'd expect to be Loki, as he's a two-faced trickster who gets up to some shady stuff behind the scenes. The beginning of this arc was pretty freaking tense with them approaching their wits' end and the constant threat of all the higher level monsters surrounding them. It's like, oh god, what's going to happen to them? Until making it to the safe floor where it's now all nice and calm and a great way to relax from all the stress that came before. But it left me wondering, how are we going to end off this season if everything's going up with no threat? And I suspect Amori thought this too, because literally, out of nowhere, a fucking super boss lands in the middle of the floor. Now we have our climax. It took me ages to randomly learn that the reason this thing showed up was because of Hestia releasing her divine power earlier. I literally thought for so long that it just popped up for no reason because Amori couldn't think of anything. As you'd expect, this is definitely the most epic fight of the season. I'd probably say it's a contender for the most awesome fight of the show so far. This thing wrecks all the lower level adventurers stuck here, despite all their teamwork, with the higher level ones also struggling to keep up after a short while. Basically, taking the struggle with the Minotaur fight and timesing it by 100, where every single well thought out plan they have fails miserably when compared to this behemoth with the most durable skin ever and heals itself automatically. And it yells. A lot. Oh god, make it stop! The only way they won was by having Belle use Velve's newest magical weapon to incinerate the top half of its body, which still doesn't kill it! So it comes down to attacking the weak point for massive damage to save the day. And from here, things quickly wrap up for this season. But not before a revelation where Hermes figures out that Belle's granddad was Zeus! My word-for-word reaction to this reveal was, of course! It makes so much sense now! Every story in Greek mythology has Zeus sticking his dick in something, so no wonder he's such a player! Now I was on to Season 2 after waiting like everyone else did. But first, they released a recap episode the week before, and I want to go on a mini tangent about this because I started to wonder why other shows don't do this when it comes to recaps instead. Just make it an extra episode for people who need a refresher. Especially in this case when I know the time difference between both seasons was like 4 years. Rather than making it a main numbered episode or putting it in the middle of the release schedule. Dr. Stone did this too, and so did Slime. Why not everything else? Anyway, while my introduction to the series meant I hadn't waited anywhere near as long as others for this season, I was still glad to see the group again. And now Mikoto's joined them too, in which I guess I wasn't paying much attention to that recap because I legit forgot who she was by the time I first saw this. I was like, who are you? She's the most level-headed, serious, and play-by-the-rules of the bunch, which I think, to an extent, adds that voice of reasoning when everyone else is either being stupider or having the goofy sides of their personalities take over. Plus, I find it to be a bit of fresh air that she's one of the few girls close to Belle that isn't in love with him. Well, at least not yet, or from what I can tell. For the first arc of this season, after Belle manages to get closer to Eyes, you are her first dance, so now you've implanted yourself in her memories forever. It's the perfect start! They have to deal with the sun god Apollo, who, I swear, like, no joke here, is a pedophile. He sounds even more perverted than me when he talks about his familia members and Belle for being young, and makes all these creepy expressions and comments about how much he wants Belle and his familia because of his youthfulness and potential. Ugh! It freaks me out so much! I hate him! He tries to steal Belle away from Hestia by forcing her into a war game, by force, and ruining her love confession, which was the last straw. But they have a massive disadvantage with only one member. So the others join the Hestia Familia to help Belle out. I kinda get it that something like this was going to happen at some points, but I liked seeing this as them getting closer, and it's not just Belle and Hestia now, partly to Hestia's dismay. And I was glad to see Lily finally get out of the Soma Familia too. As for the war game itself, when they got around to it, it was another case of them keeping it really cool and more action-packed like the latter half of Season 1, with everyone and Ryu getting their own little bit to shine here, and then the climactic fight between Belle and Apollo's pampered child. I never bothered to remember his name, I just know he's a prick. My only issue with this part is that they condensed the war game into one episode. With how much they build up through Apollo's threats, the stakes involved, and the events leading up to it, I really thought this was going to be a two-parter at least. I've heard from a few people who have read the light novels that the war game apparently lasted longer, but the anime shortened it. If that's true, then I definitely think it was a missed opportunity to flesh out the action and overall conflict of the game. Not that I hated what we got, I just feel it could have been more. But I don't know how anime is made when it comes to deciding the number of episodes, so I'm not sure if that's really the studio's fault. With the Hestia Familia being victorious, Apollo is banished from Orario, forced to hand over his property to Hestia, and probably put on the register. Which I figured, given that the opening spoils them getting the mansion. The mansion that now has tons of empty space and many magically appearing rubber ducks. And after a calmer, wacky episode to take a break and lighten the mood from the Apollo arc, we get thrown into the next one, taking place at the Pleasure Quarter. Basically, a fantasized red light district that is full of prostitutes and lots of hot ladies. Oh, what I would give to be in Belle's place right about now. I know he won't be into this, but I'll just keep sitting here and making myself comfortable. I'm making this sound way more like a porno than what it actually is. I'm still game for switching places though. What the fuck?
Shit! Fuck me! I don't fucking know! Fuck! Stop screaming! Stop!
Okay, all pervertedness and jokes aside, I'll cut to the chase. I didn't really like this arc if I'm being honest, so I'm probably not going to spend much time on it. As a whole, I just found it to be mostly uninteresting to watch, and I didn't like the story. My main criticism comes with the goal of this arc, being to rescue Haruhime. She believes that she shouldn't be saved because she's a prostitute, and they're seen as symbols of destruction who shouldn't be associated with heroes like Belle. And Belle kind of goes along with that idea, as he couldn't think of how to respond to that. However, my argument against Haruhime's belief is that, even ignoring the fact that she doesn't want to be a prostitute and is doing this against her will, regardless of what she is, she's still a person, and a person in need no less. So that alone should justify that she needs to be rescued. I thought of that immediately, but it takes Belle a couple of episodes to effectively come to the same conclusion, which just annoyed me. Partly because it acts as a dumb way to extend the arc, where they dance around the straightforward approach of getting her out while Haruhime's stuck there suffering. And I saw her in a similar light to what I did with Lily, where I felt bad for her and wanted her to get help, so it being continually delayed bugged me even more. Is there some deeper meaning behind this that I'm just missing? Because it seems really stupid. And afterwards, they reveal that Haruhime never had sex with anybody, which makes the struggle pointless. I know this touches on what I said before about Belle growing from questioning his definition of a hero, but when does common sense kick in? They later throw in a threat of the Ishtar Familia declaring war on Hestia if they try to free Haruhime, so why couldn't that be the reason for Belle hesitating from the get-go? That isn't the only issue I have with the characters here, as a similar thing applies to Ishtar herself. Being the Mesopotamian goddess of beauty and love, she's jealous of people thinking Freya is prettier than her, so she wants to use Haruhime as a sacrifice to power up her familia and destroy Freya's, and then just decides to try to seduce Belle with her powers for extra payback. That's gotta be one of the shittest villain motivations I have ever seen, and I've seen some pretty shit ones. It sounds like something from a cliche chick flick, and Belle getting swept in is just an afterthought. Even with characters like Aisha, she was angry at Haruhime for not being fazed by her situation for some reason, so she smashed the familia's most precious stone, as you do when you're angry at someone, so she was beaten and then seemingly raped by Ishtar, which forces her to obey her orders. I guess that's why Hermes didn't like her tasting his manwich! There's even this one guy who quietly sneaks up behind Freya, but then screams when he's about to attack, and oh look, she was able to stop him! Why does nobody use common sense in this arc? It's like they all had their IQ cut in half upon entering the pleasure quarter, and it's so frustrating! I also found the action to be a step back from before. It's not bad, but it feels kinda basic and boring to watch. Plus, they only go in the dungeon for like 2 minutes, and that's the only time we really see the dungeon in this whole season, despite it being in the title. I know the war game didn't have anything to do with the dungeon either, but there I found it to be more of just something different once in a while, whilst having it back to back feels lame. So by the end of it all, as Ishtar is bitch slapped off the tower and Toad Lady meets a similar fate, I thought, thank God it's finally over. My feelings towards this arc ultimately left me with a disappointing feeling for this season. At least we have Haruhime now, who also is in love with Belle, and despite my problems with everything surrounding her debut, I do like her. Then the last 2 episodes of the season focus on Belle and Hestia's relationship, which was nice, but I'd be lying if I said my thoughts on the previous arc hadn't affected my views on these episodes. I felt a little disappointed here too, as I thought, so this is how season 2 turned out. We did get to see outside of Aurario for once, which I found interesting to see more of the world, and we may have got a slight hint towards Aiza's backstory too, as she briefly breaks from her normal composure of being a badass stoic swordswoman. But most of my enjoyment from these episodes came from the comedy. And the primary source of that was the new god they introduced here, Ares. Ares! For the god of war, he's a complete idiot, and I love it. His familia is full of weak soldiers who try to start a war with Aurario, but fail miserably. And Ares himself is stuck coming up with these stupid plans for other methods of starting said war, which also go wrong, so he just makes shit up on the spot while acting foolishly evil about it. He's like the Master Koga of anime, which made me love watching him. But they gave him the Pandora's actor treatment. He only appears in 1 episode outside of him shown getting arrested in the credits at the end. Why do they do this to me? So last year, when season 3 started, I went in with more of a feeling of cautious optimism. I saw the trailer for it a couple of weeks beforehand, and it did look very exciting, but I was worried it would end up repeating the same issues I had with the previous one. And fortunately, despite one criticism I have later, it was a big improvement for me. Starting off with how the dungeon gets a ton more focus this time around. Belle's gotten used to picking up girls in the dungeon, but now he picks up a girl from the dungeon. Vine, a cute dragon girl with the ability to speak and emote. Even though she's one of the dungeon's monsters, Belle chooses to help because of how human-like she behaves, despite how this world classes monsters as the natural enemy of mankind who must never live together. Like, geez, that's a bit overdramatic, don't you think? The monsters are basically animals like in any RPG. It's not that deep, people. Anyway, Vine is very much just a child, which makes her super innocent and not knowing any better, which creates a great deal of peril with the others wanting to protect her, whilst everyone else will want to kill her due to seeing her as just a monster with the whole enemy of mankind thing. But they're also dumbasses, as they think her clearly saving a kid from getting hurt is her attacking them. Are you blind? But it's what's established here that leads to the primary thing that makes me like the season way more, as Vine leads them to discover the race known as Xenos, reincarnated monsters with high intelligence and speech. The Hestia Familia's goal this season is to protect the Xenos from other adventurers who would kill them on sight by simply viewing them as any other monster, cause I guess they'd also be deaf if they try talking to them. But by doing so, they run the risk of being branded as criminals and facing the consequences that would come with that if they're found to be protecting monsters. It creates a ton of tension throughout the whole arc due to the constant dangers from all sides, and even previous allies now having to be seen as potential threats due to not understanding the situation. Though I do somewhat question why the guild doesn't just make the Xenos' existence public knowledge to prevent this, but I kinda guess there would be some possible negative ramifications for doing so. Building on those threats, and from what I presume the tone of this series would be from the trailer, is that I got a recurring feeling that this arc could get very dark very quickly, as the Xenos are essentially like any other person in this world, just in the body of a monster. So any deaths they would suffer would feel like actual character deaths to make it more fucked up, which they do when it comes to some of the minor ones. The existence of Xenos themselves is also tied to some mystery surrounding the dungeon that gets set up with how they're reborn, and the dungeon apparently being some living being, which I assume will be explored further in the future. Additionally, this is a case where I feel they execute Bell questioning his hero logic to have him grow really well, unlike the Ishtar arc, since it feels natural and he doesn't become an idiot. Initially, he contemplates not killing any monsters at all out of fears of them being or connected to Xenos. Then he poses a question to Eyes regarding this personal conflict, to which she replies that she'll kill any monster that she faces against no matter what. Based on her wording, I assume this also relates to her backstory that got teased earlier. But it creates a further conflict for Bell, as he's now at odds with the girl he's in love with. And boy do they build on that later. And lastly, the entire season is focused purely on this arc, which I think helps to make it more fleshed out overall. But it's not just typical adventurers who pose a threat here, as there's also a group of Xenos hunters who capture and sell them on the black market, if they don't already get killed for fun first by their captain, the descendant of Daedalus, who is literally called Dix per Dix, like someone naming their Pokemon rival.
His name is Dix!
Oh, you're a dick. I'm so being your nemesis now.
Well, Dix certainly lives up to his name, as he's a straight-up violent asshole, and his fellow Familia members aren't much better at best, including these three stooges who wanted to fuck a spider?
Oh, Jesus!
And they're all under the command of Icalos, a god I've never heard of before. Hold on a second. He is the Greek god of nightmares. Though he doesn't really do much. He kinda just sits around and then gets exiled later. So that threat comes into full force when Dix and his crew kidnap Vine and some other Xenos, while most of the remaining ones retaliate against the adventurers on the safe floor. Once again, making it not safe anymore, and now shit hits the fan hard. This leads to Bell facing off against Dix, where we get to the fight scenes being cool again. I don't think it's quite on the same level as some of the ones before, but it's still really good, with Dix being the highest known leveled opponent thus far, and it further plays into Bell's development for this season as they introduce a theme of him being a fool. But in a positive way, since he's heroically optimistic. In a less positive way, Dix then forces Vine to evolve into this Lamia-like creature, causing her to go on a mindless rampage that leads to the surface. now leading into the worst case scenario as everything that could have possibly spelled bad news for these events has become reality, with the low-key Familia now inadvertently becoming the main antagonists of this arc. And despite all the effort and risks Belle takes to save her, Vine ends up dying. And then immediately gets resurrected! Okay, so nothing of any value was lost here. It's not even like a Bruno Bucciarati situation. I was expecting Vine to die as a gut punch to the viewers and to really show how dark this arc is, so I found her getting brought back straight away to be somewhat of a missed opportunity to achieve that. Similarly, the whole aspect of everyone hating Belle for attacking adventurers during Vine's rampage gets swept under the rug pretty quick too, as it just goes away upon Hestia taking the blame for him instead. When that was part of the stakes around protecting the Xenos, I found it strange to get thrown away like that. I wouldn't call these outright criticisms, they're just things I probably would have changed if I was writing this. So for the final few episodes, the Hestia Familia now attempt to sneak the Xenos out of Daedalus Street and back to safety in the dungeon. And this is where my one actual criticism of this season comes into effect. For as much as I love what this arc had done and set up before, the ending felt very rushed to me. I'll explain as I go over the main points of what happens. When the plan starts off, I found it very good because it still kept the same level of tension and feeling of urgency seen before. And it's where they build on Belle being at odds with Eyes, as he now has to fight her here. He manages to hold his own very well despite the skill gap, and from seeing this teased in the opening, I got very excited to see just how this would play out and affect their relationship. As by this point, I'm pretty sure Eyes secretly has feelings for Belle too. But the fight doesn't last very long. Belle quickly escapes while Eyes chases after him, then Vine, oh god, no, not the nails! So Eyes sees the error of her thinking and lets them leave. I like how this part gives a bit more insight into Eyes' character, and some development too, but I think it would have been a lot more dramatic if the fight was longer and then followed by this scene. We also don't have a real villain anymore, as by this point, Dix is dead and Icolos is gone. So for the final episode, they suddenly make Hermes a villain by plotting a scheme where he forces several Xenos to attack people so Belle will have to kill them to regain the people's trust and unlock more of his potential. I know Hermes has been interested in Belle ever since figuring out he's Zeus's grandson, but this moment felt very random, and the regaining trust aspect doesn't really work when the people stop caring about that like I said before. But his plan fails when Asterius shows up and fights Belle instead. This fight links to my final point about the ending feeling rushed. Don't get me wrong, the fight is epic. It's another contender for the best fight of the series, as it even feels like some Dragon Ball shit at times with how destructive, fast-paced, and flashy it gets. You get the personal struggle too with the revelation that Asterius is actually the reincarnation of the Minotaur Belle killed in the first season, which completely shocked me and deeply plays into his character of being this surprisingly honorable warrior rather than seeking revenge like I initially thought. Regardless of how he abruptly declares himself the winner of the fight when Belle didn't appear to be unable to continue or unconscious. It's how the fight was introduced that bothered me. As soon as the fight commences, all the other Xenos get completely forgotten about. Even Vine. And aren't shown again until the credits where it's like, oh by the way, they all made it back to safety. When they were the main focus of the arc, and where many of its themes lie, whilst Asterius didn't debut until a bit later, it feels wrong to just push them to the side so massively, thus giving them a very unsatisfying conclusion in my opinion. I think it would have been better if we did see them making it to the path back to the dungeon, and then have the Asterius fight. But Hermes' dumb plan had to take the spotlight instead. Actually, they could have just had Hermes enact his plan with Asterius to instigate the fight instead. That probably would have made a lot more sense. But despite the disappointing feeling I got from Season 2 overall and the way Season 3 ended, I still really like DanMachi. Once I had properly gotten into the series, I greatly enjoyed pretty much everything else during and following that moment. I came to find all the main characters great and bring something to the group as a whole with their personalities and the way they play off each other. The story, when done right, can be really good with how it can link back to and develop the characters, namely Belle of course. As part of my own bias, I found the RPG-like world and mechanics to be an appealing factor as well, and I even later found out that the way Amori incorporates the different gods in the series features callbacks to their respective mythologies and other mythological references like Daedalus, despite how wacky most of them are here. On that subject too, the humor is also great. It's not like Konosuba levels per se, but there are plenty of ridiculous moments and characters like Hestia who I found myself laughing at. And I think there is this nice balance between light-hearted and goofy moments and dark and serious ones, where it doesn't feel like a sudden shift in tone. It's more natural and thus leads to a good roller coaster ride of emotions. Lastly, it's a case where I think the harem plot device is done in a good and unique way, which is a good thing when that's what makes up the title. I think it's consistently great for the most part. There's just some parts where I feel it misses the mark and could have been done better. Now I'm left waiting for Season 4 to come out next year, where I have no idea what the story will be there, but I certainly hope it's one I'll enjoy all the way through. Even then, I still have more from this series to check out, and I really want to do so despite the odds stacked against me. I know there's a movie that came out before Season 2, and I really want to see it, but I literally cannot find it anywhere. I know Eyes has her own spin-off series that got a short adaptation, but I also can't find it anywhere outside of a Best Moments compilation. And there's a bunch of OVAs too, but you get the idea now. I went into DanMachi with no real expectations either way, then found myself on the verge of not liking it and quitting until I persevered and got to the point now where I'm delighted by it, and hope to keep watching and enjoying it for some time to come.